What's up, lifers? This is Dylan, and thank you for listening to another episode of Lifetime Value. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode and the guest we had on. Unfortunately, I had some woefully bad audio issues that I did not discover until after we wrapped on recording. So I apologize for the quality of my audio, but I promise things are going to sound much better next time. Enjoy.
Greetings, lifers, and thank you for joining us. You're listening to Lifetime Value, the customer success podcast, where we help you wrap up the week that was in customer success and start you off on the right foot for the one ahead of you. I am your host, the Big Poppy of Customer Success Podcasts. My name is Dylan Young, and this week's guest is a 3-time CS leader, having started those CS teams from scratch. He is now a full-time consultant. His company is called Success Scaled. Undoubtedly, the thing most interesting about this guy, no offense to anything else you've done, is that he just casually designs tattoos for his friends on the side. But also, in prepping for this conversation, he told me his greatest fun fact is that he has not gotten a professional haircut since 2011. What an incredibly ridiculous thing to offer up about yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Rob Zambito with us today. Thank you for being here, Rob.
Thanks for having me, Dylan. It's a pleasure.
Rob, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here. I appreciate it, first of all. I really like what you're doing with the podcast. But me, I'm a 3-time customer success leader and now full-time consultant. I started consulting customer success teams about 3 years ago. Actually, almost, I think it's to the date, come to think of it. But I only started doing it full time as of this past new year. So I'm just a few months into this, and it's been a blast. I mean, myself, I have a lot of background in customer success. I guess I only called it customer success since 2016, but every job I have had in my entire working career has been some combination of customer success and startups. I've always worked in really early stage companies. And, what started with me calling it hospitality turned into me with a role with, partner success, now customer success. I think over time, my specializations have really evolved into, number one, helping customer success teams start up from scratch. And number two, getting customer success teams to be proactive revenue generating functions instead of reactive cost centers for a business.
And it just so happens we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But can you pinpoint the moment you realized you were in customer success?
Yes. It was my first day. So my first job in customer success was at a company called Qualia. And the way that my employment there started, the CEO said, "Hey, I think you should work here." And I was like, here? Because basically at the time, the company was just sort of a ragtag group of engineers, and it was only me and one other person who were not engineers, basically expected to do sales and marketing and recruiting and ordering lunch and keeping on the lights and taking out the trash if we had to, literally anything and everything the business needed. And then I asked the CEO on day one, I was like, "What do you want me to do?" And he's like, "I think you should do onboarding." And I was like, "What's onboarding?" He's like, "I don't know, but that's for you to figure out." I was like, "Okay." And so it was that day that I got thrown right into a conference. It was great. Had no idea what I was doing or what I was talking about, because Qualia is in a very sort of esoteric domain of mortgage tech, which I'm sure you really appreciate, Dylan.
Yeah. And after my own heart.
Yeah, exactly. And somebody came up to me at the conference, and she's like, "Oh, what do you California boys call it? You call it customer success?" And I was like, "I have never heard that term before, and I'm not a California boy, but I'll take it."
It's the smile, Rob. It's the smile. So you stuck around. You have an entire consultancy around it. Why? What is it about CS that you found so intriguing that you wanted to make a career out of it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think if I want to look, I am somebody who's just genuinely fascinated by people. And I think I developed that curiosity when I was my first job. I was a waiter at a diner working the overnight shift, the graveyard shift. And this is like one of those old classic New York style diners.
Chromed
Uh,
out.
yeah, chromed out, where you're just, you've got neon in your face all hours of the day. And let me tell you, 4 a.m. at a diner in my hometown was just peak weird.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and I loved that. Especially like I think, 5 p.m. Sorry, 5 a.m. on after a Saturday night out. We'd still have the Saturday night crowd, but we'd have the early Sunday morning crowd overlap, and those crowds hated each other. So I had to resolve several disputes between, the nightclub crowd and the
The church going crowd, right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah, you got it.
It's
So I
fantastic.
think I knew that I wanted to work in a customer facing function from there, and customer success. I then started a restaurant business, and I became fascinated with customer retention, which in the restaurant business is really hard. And it wasn't until I realized that SaaS SaaS models are much more interesting to me that I eventually moved into tech and continued to want to focus on retention and expansion.
I don't think this is a hot take, but I have since resigned myself that the best food in the world is diner food, right? Can we just
I mean, I can't I can't fully agree with you because I've seen those kitchens. I've been in those kitchens.
that's why it's the best. That's there that is you want to talk about umami, right? Like that's
Oh
a
yeah,
that's a phrase that people use now. Diners have understood umami since they started.
that's true. That's true.
It's
Yeah, I mean
just
when you're eating
it's
a
dirty.
3 day old roast beef that it tastes a little oddly salty, like something's going on in that kitchen. That yeah, it makes the food more flavorful, I guess.
They care, Rob. You can tell that
They
they
do
care.
care. They
It's
they.
just a different kind of
they
caring. Rob, do you want to jump into a couple of the current events that occurred in CS in
Sure,
the past
let's do
week?
it. Yeah,
All right. So I'm really excited for this first one. And the reason I'm excited for it is because it's a shot of positivity. What I believe the conversation lately has been a little bit negative, a
hmm
little bit negative. So this is a post from LinkedIn from a Mr. Ziv Peled. He's super well
hmm
known. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. Have you ever talked to Ziv? Do you know if I'm saying it correctly?
I have not, but
Okay,
Ziv, if you're listening, we're doing
we're
our
sorry.
best.
Yep. So it starts with 5 reasons why customer success manager is the best job I ever had. So actually, now that I'm reading this, maybe this is an advertisement for you to go and work for him because he's the chief customer officer at this point. Anyway,
hmm
um, I love every single point. There's 5 points, and I love every single one in this. But they are essentially in this order: unparalleled impact, collaboration and teamwork, professional growth, championing customer advocacy, dynamic industry landscape. And Rob, I am assured that you have listened to previous episodes. I actually talked a bit about this with JP Frost. And we explained it essentially in the same way. Like there is no other job in the professional world aside from maybe a consultant, which you do now, with the ability to sit down with different organizations every single day and dive deep into what their strategies are and how it is that you can possibly effectuate change within those.
hmm
I've never seen another job that does that. Certainly not accounting, not even in sales,
Yeah.
right? You just don't get that deep. Um, do you agree with these points? Is there any one of them that really sticks out to you as kind of like why it is that you love customer success?
Yeah, I really like the third one on growth. So professional growth,
Yeah.
not customer growth. But I think professional growth, I mean, I feel nothing but an extraordinary amount of gratitude for the fact that I stumbled into customer success because, I mean, nobody, literally nobody that I know grew up saying they wanted to work in customer success, mostly because that term wasn't used
Right. How
prior
could you?
to maybe 15 years ago. Um, and so I, like many people, sort of just stumbled into it, and it was the best possible thing I could have found because I finally, found something that I think captured so many different um, interests and so many different interests and curiosities that I had. So I think I was able to also, in my time at various companies, bring a lot of other people into that growth path, which for me has been really, really gratifying. Like at Qualia, for example, I think in my time there, we hired about 70 people to our support team. And by the time I left, about 40 of them got promoted to other roles in the company. So some people went into uh, our product team, our QA team. They went on to be senior CSMs. They went to our sales team. They became solutions architects and solutions engineers.
Yeah.
They built out the L&D teams, and it was just so cool because the CS team was like a feeder school for for the rest of the multi-hundred person company at that point in time, and that was just so cool. Just being able to grow people. I tended to say at that time that the only way we were going to grow a big company is by growing big people. And as cheesy as that sounds, that's really what we did. So that one really stood out to me.
How is that different than coming in at a junior level of the engineering department? Do you feel like customer success or CS in general, so maybe it's support folks, they just have to be so much more well rounded? And so they've got so many different paths that they can go? Or could it be that CS is so immature as a profession that you can just end up going in any direction?
That's a really good question. And I think there is an extent to which CS is immature, but I think that even when CS matures, it's inherently very multidisciplinary,
Yeah.
and the skills that are required to be really good at onboarding vary substantially from the skills that make you really good at retention or upsell. And so I think there is an inevitably diverse skill set that a CSM needs to have. And I recently worked on trying to build a rubric of what makes a CSM successful, almost like a report card that people can grade themselves against. You're shaking your head no.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I want to know how this story ends because you had a lilt as you
Hmm.
rode the roller coaster up on this story arc, and I am fully expecting it to be. I realized that that was a fool's errand that cannot be done, and I have since abandoned that project, Dylan.
I have my doubts, I'll put it that way, because I've iterated now on this thing several times, and then I keep finding little quirks and personality traits, and I'm like, wait, but that
Hmm.
needs to be in the model, and it's just not.
Yeah.
So it's challenging, but we'll see if I get there.
My money is on you won't. Not for
Thank you.
lack of trying, Rob. It's not for a lack of confidence in you. I have been talking a lot, and you and I met at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I was probably talking about this even at that point, but it is crystallizing more in my head every single day that the formulaic approach to customer success is a dead end. Or maybe it's actually the exact opposite. It is such a multiverse of options within customer success that is only multiplied exponentially depending on your industry, depending upon your department's mandate, uh, depending upon your TAM, that it is nearly impossible to define customer success as a individual single thing without understanding all of those variables. And so I am open to being wrong about that, but I think customer success is a bit too ambiguous today for that approach to work.
Can I speak to that?
You absolutely can.
I felt that way a few years ago, and I built a model for me that made it all make sense. And I found it to be pretty consistent from one company to the next. And it started because I was talking to my mom and I was trying to explain what is customer success, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I eventually, like, I was explaining all these complex things around, like, I'm responsible for the, revenue expansion and dollar expansion from existing accounts, and it's a post-sale function. Eventually, I was just frustrated and said, you know what? I'm just the guy who's responsible for making sure that customers are happy and buying more stuff, right?
Yeah.
That they're sticking with us and buying more stuff.
Yeah.
And I realized that's just the easiest way to explain what customer success is. We're just responsible for making sure that customers are sticking around and happy and buying more stuff. Now, obviously, go ahead.
Except
in
a company where they're not responsible for expansion, or in a company where there's nothing else to sell.
Right? So that's true. I think the common denominator, though, typically boils down to retention, right?
I agree.
I think that's almost inevitably customer success is at least responsible for the leading indicators of retention, where that's
okay. So let me stop you there, Rob.
Go ahead.
You're gonna get me revved up, dude. So I would agree. I think retention, renewals is table stakes for customer success.
Yeah.
But there has been a decent amount of content created lately that implies that not every customer success department is even doing that they're even owning renewals. I think the gentleman's name is Chad Horenfeld, who wrote a Substack or a Medium article recently that said, get over yourself and start owning renewals, customer success. And I read that headline and I said, who isn't doing that right now?
Right.
And if you aren't, are you just
question.
support?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a good question. And I have met people, peers of ours in the mortgage tech space, actually, who, for them, the customer success function is purely customer training. That's it. They just do customer training. I was like, do you do support at least? They were like, no. Do you do renewals? No. Do you do check-ins with customers quarterly or anything like that? Do you monitor NPS? No, we just do training. And so it was really interesting. And I think there's some people who think that that's a good model because it basically completely extracts any sort of dollars from getting in the way of the customer outcomes, supposedly. But I don't think that that's true in practice. I think it's a disaster of a model in practice, because that team becomes, their KPIs are so far removed from company financial outcomes that CS really isn't a revenue function at that point. It's just a cost center of a different form.
Yeah, I would argue that they're just improperly titled. They're a training team. They're an L&D team. They're not.
I'll put it this way. This was one of those companies that added, it's an old company that added customer success later on. They were like, oh, all the kids are doing it, right? So let's make a customer success team.
All those Californians.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I think you're actually feeding into my point. I think you're strengthening it for me that it's a little too ambiguous today, and there's not enough understanding. Like sales, you know what sales does? They go out and they sell shit. Accounting, you know what they do? They pay invoices and they receive invoices.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't think that customer success has. And I don't know that it ever will be. I'm on the fence over whether customer success is still called customer success in 10 years, or whether we decide that it's called post-sales enablement and training and onboarding and renewals and expansion are all kind of different departments, and they all roll up to post-sales enablement or something similar.
That's an interesting take. Hadn't thought about that before.
Because I think customer success, we're getting confused.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that confusion may be true at an industry level, but I think what's most important is whether that confusion is a problem at the company level, right? So if a company, one of the core areas that I think about a lot is interdepartmental relations.
Yeah.
So take upsell, for example. You can't have people stepping on each other's toes. Take customer advocacy. Let's say I wanted to turn you as a customer into a referral account, a referral generating account. And then you get reached out to by both me as your CSM and somebody on marketing. Well, then that's not a good look, right? And you're stepping on each other's toes
Hmm.
again. And then sales too could step in the mix and it could become messy. But I think as long as the swim lanes are clear within a given company, then the industry problem matters less to me, you know?
I would agree, but also then titling doesn't matter at all, right? Like you could be called the wizard of uh, customer happiness
Oh yeah.
at a company. But so my argument initially here was that there can be no formula because it is at a, if not an individual level, then at least at a company level, how it is you define what success looks like, what that person is responsible for, how they drive those KPIs. There is no standard today. I mean,
There may
I have what I think is a standard,
Yeah.
but very rarely is that is there 100% overlap with a job description of
What
what
do you
somebody
think the
else is
standard
doing.
is?
I think it's retention and expansion,
Right.
and
Yeah.
I have said as much before that I think everything else is just in service of those two things. It doesn't really
Mm,
matter how you get it
right.
done, whether it's you, whether you have a team under you. Those are the two things that customer
Yeah.
success is responsible for.
Right. So to combine those, it's net revenue retention, right?
Sure, but it's gross revenue too. Like you don't want to focus
Right.
all your time on a single customer
Sure.
and they put you at 101 NRR, but you have 1% GRR, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, those are extreme numbers, but
Sure. Sure. No, I understand. Yeah, no, I'm with you. But I do think that you're probably right that either there might be a rebranding of customer success or there will be a focusing of customer success on that notion of NRR, right? That's my view, at least.
yeah,
And
and
I'm in favor of the focusing.
I think we're going totally off topic here, but I think that all of the other things we've talked about, like training and onboarding and support, I think those are all in service
Right.
of retention and expansion, and you
Agreed.
can show through lines back to retention and expansion from what those job roles or departments do.
Yep.
And it's why I've seen training and onboarding go together, or training, onboarding, and support go together, because
Right.
the expectation is that onboarding makes support's job easier,
Yep.
training makes support's job easier. But I think at the end of the day, the way you make an argument for the efficacy of the department as a whole, assuming all of those things roll up into it, is going to be those revenue numbers.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. And I think that's true. And I think that's especially true right now. There's been a dramatic shift in the revenue pressure on customer success teams. And that's not only revenue pressure by way of expansion or retention, but also margins. I
Yeah.
mean, I had never until just recently been part of Series A startups that are focused on their margins. 3 years ago, that was unheard of. It was all growth. And so I think that's a
Yeah.
really interesting transition that the industry has gone through recently. And, obviously it comes with a lot of challenges, new challenges for customer success teams.
Well, and I think that fits into the theme of your conversations in the presentation you did at this conference a couple of weeks ago, where I'm paraphrasing, and feel free to tell me if I'm totally missing the mark on what it is you were trying to teach, but it was essentially trying to get CSMs comfortable with selling.
You got it.
Boom.
Yeah. I think that the core of the presentation was about the fact that I am one of the most reluctant salespeople you'll ever find. It was even hard for me to just articulate that sentence because it required me to self-identify as a salesperson. And I'm just not. But at the same time, I look at my track record and I'm like, all I've ever done is sell things in some way or another,
Mhm.
right? And I've honed this craft so reluctantly. And I think the fact that I've been reluctant has been what's made me somewhat more effective in my career. And I think I look at examples of peers of mine that I've worked with who are similar, like my friend Adam. He and we built the customer success function at Qualia, and it really the customer success function at Qualia ended up being responsible for 2/3 of company revenues, net new company revenues, which was huge.
It's
It was
supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing, right?
Yeah.
We built a whole sales function within the customer success team. But Adam and I are both not salespeople. And if you look at, I always kind of roast Adam for this, that his first sales script, when we were doing the initial sales for the company, he literally said, "It's so easy, a monkey could do it." And I was like, Adam, please take that out of the script. That's not going to convince anybody. It also just patently untrue. I mean, our software was unusable at that point in time for many of our users. So I think ironic salespeople is kind of a topic that I'm very curious about.
I want to flip it on its head, though. Turn this into a bit of a therapy session.
Sure.
But what is your interpretation of sales? And I know exactly what your answer is going to be. Paraphrased, right? Like I will know the spirit of this answer, and it's something along the lines of salespeople make me feel icky, and so I don't like the way they do it, and so to be defined as a salesperson, I don't want to make people feel icky, right? It's like this. I call it schlocky. I don't even think that's a real word, but like, is that am I kind of hitting it on? Am I on script there, or how would you define it?
I think that's a fairly strong, yeah, that's a fairly good summary. So just so I understand, you're asking me what's the hesitation I find for myself and for other people, right? In terms of why they don't want to identify as salespeople.
Right, and then the quick follow behind that is, and is that why they don't want to sell?
For the most,
Because that's what they think it is.
yeah. See, I don't think that's. I think in general the answer is yes. I think most people in customer success are uncomfortable when they make other people that they speak to uncomfortable.
I mean, sure, but like, isn't that?
No, that's not everybody. So I was on the phone earlier with a friend of mine. He teaches negotiations. Really smart guy. His name is Max Bevilacqua. If you want to look into any of the work that he does. And one of the things that was on my mind, I didn't actually talk with him about this, is that I've grown a level of comfort with uncomfortable situations that I didn't used to have. Right. For example, like dropping a price point and then just sitting in silence and being able to deal with that silence is a really difficult skill that I had to learn in practice. Right. Like if you're a CSM listening to this and you're thinking about how am I going to get this 10% price increase across to my customer, learning to deal with that silence after you just drop the price increase is hard, but it's a skill I've learned. And so I think that most CS folks don't have that embedded as part of their training at most companies, that and many other sales skills. But I think that it's never too late to start picking up those skills. Just does require a lot of practice.
I want to zoom out because I think at a granular level, I disagree with the price point thing, but that might be a personal thing. But zooming out, I do totally agree with the idea of being comfortable in uncomfortable situations. I had a conversation. I don't think it was a part of a podcast, but I was recently talking to another CSM, and it kind of crystallized in my head at that time that I think the best CSM, there's a couple levels or skill sets to CSM, right? Like the ability to, I don't even know what the lowest level is, run a meeting, I guess. And then like the next level or a couple levels up would be your ability to speak with them at a strategic level, analyze data, make suggestions about how additional pieces of your product could aid them. But I do not think that's the pinnacle. I think the pinnacle is the ability to have an absolutely horrible conversation with a customer in the feedback that they deliver to you. Your product sucks. It's not doing what I expected.
Yeah.
It's not worth the money. And being able to handle that conversation dispassionately
Right.
and create next steps while still maintaining a amicable relationship with the person
Yep.
who just delivered,
Right.
who just took a dump on your
Yeah.
product.
Right. Yeah.
That to me is the pinnacle of a CSM.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I think that I see how you reach that conclusion. I actually just 2 days ago had such an awesome workshop with this company that I'm consulting with on a methodology to de-escalate angry customers.
Mm-hmm.
And we walked through a lesson that I've sort of learned the hard way by screwing it up so many times, in a methodology that ultimately works really well for me and is now working for them. And I think the most interesting learning I've ever had in that domain is to think of those types of customer situations, the most difficult, pressing customer situations. Think of them as a game.
Mm.
And if you think of them as a game, then it allows you to sort of step back, almost see yourself in like a third person view, and realize that honestly, most of the time you're just bickering about some nonsense software that obviously it has real meaning behind it. But yeah, I mean, to sort of think of it as a game and to view that like your job is to stay calm, stay composed, and to sit with a level of discomfort. And then ultimately to win the game is to find that sort of win-win situation with you and the customer.
Mm-hmm.
But I think keeping a degree of calmness and composure, that's rule number one, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to handling the most difficult situations where the customer is complaining about like claimed oversell or a feature request that they're really passionate about or a bug that's really getting in their way or that kind of thing. That's sort of rule number one for me.
I bristle at the idea of a game because I think if ever a customer listened to this episode, I would never want them to think that I wasn't treating their concerns
Mm.
as wholly legitimate.
Mm.
And as a game, it's fun, it's a competition, it's almost adversarial, it's combative. And I don't think that that's and so like I don't know that that's what you meant, right? Everybody can view it differently. But for me, I would never refer to it as a game. I always talk about getting rid of the scenario where it feels like you're talking face to face and like you can't see what they're looking at. It's
Right.
behind you and you're in the way.
Mm.
I
Right.
instead, and I believe it was the Dale Carnegie book that brought this to my attention, but maybe it was a different one, about standing shoulder to shoulder with them and talking about what their issues are so that you can see what they're looking at. You can see it from their perspective. You can empathize with them. And that's not to say you can't maintain your company's goals
Right.
as you do that. You should not become a doormat to that individual, but eliminating that you versus them dynamic and instead making it us versus the issue.
And so I love what you said there. And can I point out something so an assumption that you made was that the customer was the opponent. And that's
my personality, Rob.
right. It might be your personality, but it's interesting because it conflicts with what you then said, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's an important distinction that I'm glad you called out. And no one's ever said that to me before, so I'm so happy you brought that up. To call it a game doesn't mean you don't take it seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, I have watched the Jets lose enough games to know that I take these things very, very, very seriously.
I tried so hard to not let the Jets get mentioned. God damn it.
I'm surprised that you didn't bring that up, but
I will not give them any space.
But yeah,
my property.
But my point is, just because it's a game doesn't mean you don't take it seriously, and it doesn't mean the customer is the opponent. But I do think that to treat it as a game in your mind, to remember that there is life beyond this interaction, is something that I've had to sort of work with a lot of CSMs. That then results in situations where the CSM expresses extreme empathy with the customer and uses tactics like mirroring more effectively, right? Which they might not be prone to do if they're feeling like a very adversarial relationship is developing with the customer. And the CSM can speak to their experience and they can provide very calculated recommendations, all because they've been able to step back and remove themselves from, the pressure of the personal situation.
And that might be the commonality there is removing your emotions from the situation.
Right.
And the mirroring thing is an interesting one. And first of all, I want to call out and appreciate that you called out the incongruency in my statements. That's one I'll have to look into. But also, the mirroring thing I thought was really interesting that you said, because it'll come through in the way you talk,
right,
the way you treat them, but also, like, we're all on Zoom these days, if not in person, it'll come through in your body language.
Yeah.
Like if you just shut down and you cross your arms and like you look defensive, then you got to be conscious of all of that.
Yeah. It reminds me of a story. A customer I was talking to once, she was so mad because our software wasn't working. And she was like, I am so pissed off. And I was like, I'm sorry you're frustrated. And she's like, did I say I was frustrated? I said, I'm pissed off. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry you're pissed off. And so I realized I have to use good mirroring with not only the exact verbiage the customer is using, but to be able to then expound on that verbiage shows the customer, I understand your problem so well that I'm even going to amplify it, the impact of it, to show you how well I understand it, which to the novice CSM, and i.e. to me when I started in CS, I was like, this is such a bad idea. Why would I do that? Why would I amplify the problem? I should diminish the problem. I should act like the problem's not a real thing, right? Turns
Gaslight
out,
them.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I used to say to customers, that's so funny that you asked for that. We've never had anybody ask for that before. That's you're the only person who's ever said that. And customers would then reach the conclusion, well, then I guess I'm not a good fit for you.
Yeah.
Right? Because you don't understand my business and my use case. And what I learned is that I had to fully embrace the customer pain and to show them that, to reflect it back in their own words and to expand on it, which feels so counterintuitive the first couple times you do it, but pays off in the long run,
That takes me to the next portion of our show that I am very excited for. And that is the segment that we refer to as BS in CS.
Biggest load of crap I've ever heard.
Number one bullshit. Oh, number one bullshit.
Rob, if you could choose one, what is the trend, catchphrase, or otherwise related to customer success that you would like to see done away with forever?
It would make me so happy if people in CS could stop using the term strategic. I think it's been one of the most mind-numbing things that I've heard in customer success. And I actually think it's actually dangerous for customer success organizations to throw it around in such a way that they think it has an exact definition. What I mean by that is that a lot of CSMs, there's been a lot of ongoing debates about how CSMs need to work on strategic things. And I paused, and this started from a disagreement I had with one of my own reports, who was saying, well, I don't want to do support because I want to work on strategic things. And I was like, strategic things? Like what? That was the first time I heard somebody say that. It's a long time. I was like, what about support is not strategic, right? Doing CS without support to me in an early stage company. Now I understand in later stage companies, yes, those sort of functions can be siloed. But think about my background is typically very early stage companies where people need to be not just excited but proud to wear a lot of hats. And if you're a CSM who's not willing to do support, it's like hiring a salesperson who says like, I don't want to source my own leads. Why would I do that? Right?
Yeah.
I don't want to cold call. Why would I do that? And most people in CS, if they heard somebody say that, they'd be like, wow, that person's not a team player. Right? It's like playing chess without pawns. It's like, okay, you need the small tactical things
Yeah.
to win this quote unquote strategic big picture.
Yeah.
So I think that this notion of strategic is so vague that it's not helpful. I think, you could have I jokingly scheduled a strategic lunch with a customer once. It's like, what's a strategic lunch? How's that different from regular lunch? I was like, oh, this one's strategic.
So I'll push back a little bit on this for
Sure.
a number of different reasons. So first of all, I think, you cannot use strategic as a veil
Yeah.
or as a smoke screen to not want to do stuff.
Right.
But I do think if you think about your time as zero sum, right? Like it's finite, it's our
Sure.
greatest resource, then I know, at least for me personally, like I can't spend time on support because the amount of learning curve I would have to achieve a level of knowledge and ability is not worth it as compared to my ability to get deep quickly about their business goals, the way in which they're trying to achieve those today, and ways in which my software might be able to help, software or services might be able to help. I have a much greater impact, and quite frankly, I think there is a much more scalable impact there than with support.
Mhm.
But I think this ties back to what I was saying before, in that that's why I'm an enterprise CSM and I'm not a seed stage CSM,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those are not comparable titles. They wouldn't live in the same spectrum. But the idea is, again, that we have tried to apply CS as this moniker that lives in perpetuity across all industries, all stages of a company, when it does not.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's reasonable. And I think what you're describing to me is a situation where your company has probably reached the stage where that specialization is really valuable. But what I will say is that if I managed an enterprise CSM and their account had a really substantial bug that was causing churn risk, I'm like, forget your notion of strategic as being, oh, I have QBRs and I make success plans. Fix that bug, because that is the strategic thing to do if that's what's causing the churn risk.
Sure, if I had two options, they report a bug in the morning, and I have a meeting in the afternoon scheduled with them to talk about future business plans.
Mm-hmm.
And my only option is I can either hold that meeting or I can scrap it and use that time for them to get on the phone with my support folks and figure out the bug. That's how I would attack that, right? But
Yeah.
there's no way with that level of urgency that I can go and learn how our system works and how it integrates with their system and figure out that. So, in the same way, I think there are seasons for founders and CEOs. They typically, the large majority of them cannot survive past a couple of valuation rounds, of
Yeah.
equity rounds. I think it's the same with CSMs. Like it's just there's a time and a place for certain skill sets.
Yeah.
And I think anybody can do it, but once you've been doing a certain thing for a really long time, it is difficult to unlearn that.
Anybody can do what exactly?
Anybody can be the jack of all trades, right? You can be the CSM that's supporting your customers, trying to do retention and expansion, but also handling bugs.
Right. Yeah.
But if you've been an enterprise CSM for 12 years, well, then that's probably going to be difficult for you. You're probably not cut out for seed stage companies.
I think that's fair. And I think at that point, it boils down to a skill versus will situation.
Mhm.
I think the skill might be there, but if the will isn't, then, I'll take somebody who's willing to own everything over someone who's, uh, you know,
Got the skill to do one thing really well.
well, yeah, skilled to do one thing really well and hesitates to own domains that could seem outside of their basically like work that they feel like they're too good for. From a values perspective,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's to me that's a non-starter in companies that I work with.
Well, and I think that there's a great amount of nuance in your statement there, right? It could be that that person's values are, I think my time is best spent doing X, Y, Z.
Yeah,
And that is different than saying, hey, I don't want to do that.
right.
And I
Yeah,
think that that's where it's super important to get really transparent
right.
with your employees or your
Yeah.
supervisors about what it is you're actually communicating,
Hmm.
because
Yeah,
it can
that's a
be
good point.
misconstrued in the way you just described.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's a great point. And I think I fault myself as a leader in certain environments that I've been in where I've brought people on talking about, what we want customer success to be as a place that's really focused on retention and expansion, but not making it maybe clear enough that like the day to day for a long, for the foreseeable future until we can get to that point is going to include a lot of grunt work, right?
Yeah. And I think the art, well, there's an art and a science to it, of beating back those daily demands so that you can make time for the white space opportunity mapping,
Yeah.
strategic, that's a swear word now, but those sorts of activities. I think that's part of the job, is understanding how to make that room. Like, Rob, let's wrap it up. The CS Player of the Week. Who out there in the customer success profession is moving it forward in the past 7 days? Who do you want to give a shout out to?
I want to give a shout out to a friend of mine. His name is Ryan Johansson. He's a CSM who's really building a practice around burnout in the
Mm,
customer success profession. And I think a few years ago, it felt much more like something you're not really supposed to talk about, right?
yeah,
Like you're not really
yeah.
supposed to address the fact that there's an overwhelming number of obligations that CSMs have, and there was an overwhelming trend of people burning out that culminated in large part with the Great Resignation, as they called it, right?
Mm,
Which impacted CS substantially. And Ryan has just so many really useful tips, like putting your phone on grayscale so you don't see red notifications, because red is something that triggers
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
our fight or flight responses in our minds. And uh, things like turning off notifications, a daily routine that, morning routine that can help you focus on your main goals, journaling routines. I mean, he's so talented, and he's got a lot of really good reading recommendations as well. I grabbed coffee with him. He's based here in Boston, similar to me, and grabbed coffee with him recently, and it was a really awesome conversation.
That's cool. That's cool. That's a thing that's close to my heart. So I'm definitely gonna go and find him, follow him, and I would encourage others to do the
Mm-hmm.
same. Rob, how about referrals and recommendations? If you could take the audience members and point them in the direction of any one thing or activity, and it does not have to be customer success related, what would it be?
Yeah, good question. The one that jumps to mind here, a couple days ago, I caught up with my friend. Her name is Lauren Salanitro, and she's a co-founder of a community called Women in Customer Success, Women of Customer Success. So
Okay.
I think I got that one article wrong. But yeah, it's a community that's focused on elevating the careers of women in the customer success space, which, tech obviously is made up of a lot of people who, like you and me,
Oh yeah.
are white
Oh
guys.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I think what Lauren's been doing has been fantastic. Customer success is different from the rest of tech in the amount of opportunity that I think is there, in addition to the breadth and scope of the role.
Yep.
And I think that having a community of people who can have conversations like this is really valuable. So I wanted to shout Lauren out there.
Yeah, that's great. Rob, where can folks connect with you?
You can shoot me a LinkedIn request. You can email me, hello@robzambito.com. It's the easiest way to reach me.
Rob, this has been a ton of fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
You've been listening to Lifetime Value, the podcast for customer success professionals. If you like what you've heard, please rate our show and subscribe wherever you find your podcast. Please note that the views expressed in these conversations are attributed only to those individuals on this podcast and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of their respective employers. For all inquiries, please reach out via email to dylan@lifetimevaluepodcast.com. Find us on YouTube via our channel Lifetime Value, and find us on the socials at Lifetime Value Podcast. Until next time.
This is Rob Zambito, and you're listening to Lifetime Value, which is the customer success podcast.